In the 1930s, working-class mothers were one-pan supper masters. They created magic with just a handful of potatoes, a can of beans, and leftover scraps. They turned the simplest pantry staples into complete meals that fed tired factory workers after 12-hour shifts. These weren't just suppers. They were small miracles made with smart thinking and love. Today, we're stepping back into those kitchens to rediscover 31-pan suppers that fed working-class families. Which one will bring back your strongest memory? In the 1930s, working-class mothers made poor man's meal every single week. They used the cheapest ingredients from corner grocery stores. They bought 5 pounds of potatoes for 15 cents. They bought 1 large onion for 3 cents. They bought 8 beef hot dogs for 12 cents. The total cost fed 8 people for 30 cents. Mothers peeled potatoes and sliced them thin into rounds. They chopped onions into small pieces that made eyes water. They sliced hot dogs into thick coins. They heated lard in a big cast-iron skillet until it shimmered. They fried potatoes first until edges turned golden brown. They added onions and stirred until they softened completely. They threw in hot dog slices last. Everything cooked together in one pan for 20 minutes. The smell filled the whole tenement building. Children ran home from playing stickball in the street. Fathers washed coal dust from their hands. Families ate this meal 3 times every week. Will you try this supper this weekend? Working-class families called this meal Depression goop because everything mixed together. Factory workers' wives made it in one big pot. They bought 1 pound of ground beef for 18 cents. They bought elbow macaroni for 8 cents per box. They bought canned tomatoes for 10 cents per can. The whole meal cost under 40 cents. Mothers browned ground beef in a heavy pot first. They broke meat into small crumbles with a wooden spoon. They never drained the grease, because fat meant flavor. They poured dry macaroni straight into the beef. They dumped 2 cans of tomatoes on top. They added salt and black pepper generously. They stirred everything together and covered the pot tight. The meal cooked for 30 minutes on low heat. Macaroni absorbed all the tomato juice and beef fat. Children scraped their bowls clean every single time. Leftovers lasted 3 days in the icebox. Mothers reheated portions for lunch the next day. Coal miners' wives made this supper in big roasting pans. They used the toughest, cheapest beef from the butcher shop. They bought 2 pounds of beef chunks for 25 cents. They bought 1 head of cabbage for 5 cents. They bought carrots and turnips for pennies per pound. The whole meal cost under 50 cents. Wives seasoned beef with salt and pepper heavily. They placed meat in the bottom of a roasting pan. They chopped cabbage into thick wedges around the beef. They cut carrots and turnips into big chunks. They poured 1 cup of water over everything. They covered the pan with a heavy lid tight. The pan went into a wood-burning oven for 3 hours. Beef became so tender it fell apart easily. Vegetables soaked up all the meat juices perfectly. Miners came home covered in black coal dust. They scrubbed faces and hands at the pump outside. They ate this supper with thick slices of bread. Before we move on, many of you asked in the comments where to find these recipes. We even received tons of email, too, so we published these recipes on our website. The link is in the description. Let's continue. Southern working-class mothers made red beans every Monday. They soaked dried red beans overnight in cold water. 1 pound of dried beans cost 20 cents. They bought beef sausage for 30 cents per pound. They used 1 big cast-iron pot for everything. Mothers drained soaked beans in the morning before work. They put beans back in the pot with fresh water. They sliced sausage into thick rounds and added it. They chopped 1 onion and threw it in whole. They added bay leaves and black pepper generously. The pot simmered on the stove for 4 hours. Beans turned creamy and thick like gravy naturally. Mothers came home during lunch to stir once. The smell greeted children walking home from school. Families ate beans over white rice every single time. One pot fed 10 people for under 50 cents. Leftovers tasted even better the second day. This meal saved families during the hardest times. Black families made black-eyed peas in one pot always. They bought dried peas for 15 cents per pound. They bought smoked turkey wings for 20 cents. The whole meal cost under 40 cents total. Mothers sorted peas on the kitchen table carefully. They removed small stones and bad peas by hand. They soaked peas overnight in a big pot. Morning came and they drained the soaking water. They added fresh water and turkey wings together. They seasoned with salt, pepper, and red pepper flakes. The pot boiled first, then simmered low for hours. Turkey meat fell off the bones completely tender. Peas broke down and created their own thick gravy. Children came home to the smell every single day. Fathers dipped cornbread into the pot liquor deeply. Families believed eating peas brought good luck always. This meal stretched further than any other supper. Mothers served it 4 times every single week. Nobody ever complained once. 5 one-pan suppers fed working families for pennies. Poor man's meal cost 30 cents. Depression, Goop fed 8 people for 40 cents. Coal miners ate beef and cabbage after 12-hour shifts. Red beans and smoked turkey stretched all week long. Which forgotten supper will you try this weekend? 5 more suppers coming next. Factory workers ate Johnny cakes and beans for supper often. And mothers bought cornmeal for 20 cents per 5-pound bag. They bought dried navy beans for 15 cents. The meal cost under 40 cents for 10 people. Mothers soaked beans overnight in cold water every time. They cooked beans with salt pork all day long. They mixed cornmeal with salt and boiling water. They formed flat cakes with their wet hands. They fried Johnny cakes in lard on a hot griddle. Cakes turned golden brown and crispy on both sides. Children ate Johnny cakes with molasses drizzled on top. Fathers ate beans straight from the pot with spoons. This meal required no plates or fancy serving dishes. Families ate together standing around the stove in winter. The cast-iron griddle stayed hot for hours. Johnny cakes filled empty stomachs fast and cheap. Beans provided protein when meat was too expensive. This supper kept families alive through the Depression. Factory workers called this meal SOS every single time. Mothers bought dried beef for 25 cents per jar. They made white gravy from flour and milk. The whole meal cost under 35 cents total. Mothers heated butter in a cast-iron skillet first. They added flour and stirred until it turned golden. They poured milk slowly while whisking constantly to avoid lumps. The gravy thickened and bubbled over medium heat. They tore dried beef into small strips carefully. They added beef to the gravy and stirred. They cooked everything together for 10 minutes more. Mothers toasted bread slices in the oven until crispy. They poured creamy beef gravy over toast generously. Children soaked up every drop with bread pieces. Fathers ate 3 slices at one sitting always. This meal saved families money during hard times. Night shift workers ate it cold for midnight lunch. Nobody wasted one single drop of gravy. Working mothers made meatloaf on sheetpans weekly. They bought ground beef for 25 cents per pound. They added stale bread crumbs to stretch meat. They used 1 egg and chopped onions together. The whole meal cost under 50 cents easily. Mothers mixed meat, breadcrumbs, egg, and onion by hand. They shaped the mixture into a long loaf. They placed the loaf on a big sheet pan. They surrounded meat with potato chunks and carrot pieces. They drizzled everything with bacon grease or lard. The pan went into a hot oven for 1 hour. Meatloaf browned perfectly on top and stayed moist inside. Vegetables roasted until tender and caramelized at edges. The smell filled every apartment in the building. Children set the table with mismatched plates eagerly. Fathers sliced meatloaf thick at the table ceremoniously. Families ate every bite without leaving scraps behind. Leftover meatloaf made sandwiches for tomorrow's lunch. This meal felt like Sunday supper every time. Eastern European working families made cabbage rolls in skillets. They bought 1 head of cabbage for 10 cents. They bought ground beef for 20 cents per pound. They bought white rice for 5 cents per pound. The meal cost under 40 cents for 10 people. Mothers chopped cabbage into thick shreds with big knives. They browned ground beef in a cast-iron skillet. They added uncooked rice straight into the beef. Then they poured canned tomatoes over everything and stirred. They piled chopped cabbage on top in layers. They covered the skillet with a tight-fitting lid. Everything cooked together for 45 minutes on low heat. Rice absorbed tomato juice and beef fat perfectly. Cabbage wilted down and sweetened as it cooked. This meal tasted exactly like rolled cabbage, but saved hours of work. Mothers served it straight from the skillet at the table. Families ate until the pan was scraped completely clean. Nobody missed traditional cabbage rolls at all. Working mothers made tuna casserole in the 1940s constantly. They bought canned tuna for 15 cents per can. They bought egg noodles for 12 cents per box. They bought cream of mushroom soup for 10 cents. The whole meal cost under 50 cents total. The mothers boiled egg noodles in salted water first. They drained noodles and dumped them into a casserole dish. They opened 2 cans of tuna and flaked it. They mixed tuna with cream of mushroom soup together. They poured the mixture over noodles and stirred. They sprinkled crushed crackers on top for crunch. The casserole baked for 30 minutes until bubbly hot. The top turned golden brown and crispy perfectly. This meal became America's favorite working-class supper overnight. Mothers made it every Friday without fail religiously. Children never complained about eating it 3 times weekly. Leftovers reheated perfectly for next day lunch. This casserole saved families time, money, and sanity. 10. One-pan suppers kept working families alive. Johnny cakes and beans cost 40 cents. Creamed chipped beef fed night shift workers. Sheetpan meatloaf felt like Sunday supper. Cabbage roll skillet saved hours of work. Tuna casserole became America's Friday favorite. Which supper will you cook this month? 20 more suppers are coming next. In the 1940s, working-class mothers bought chicken drumsticks for 29 cents per pound. Drumsticks were the cheapest chicken parts at every butcher shop. Whole chickens cost more and required skilled butchering at home. Drumsticks came ready to cook straight from the butcher paper. Mothers bought 8 drumsticks for under 50 cents total. They added potatoes, carrots, and onions from the root cellar. The whole meal cost under 75 cents for 8 people. Mothers scrubbed drumsticks under cold water from the pump. They patted chicken dry with flour sack towels carefully. They rubbed each drumstick with salt, pepper, and paprika generously. They placed drumsticks on a big sheetpan in rows. They chopped potatoes into thick wedges and scattered them around. They added carrot chunks and whole onion quarters between chicken. They drizzled everything with bacon grease or lard heavily. The pan went into a hot oven for 1 hour. Chicken skin turned crispy and golden brown perfectly. Vegetables roasted until tender and caramelized at the edges. The smell filled every apartment in the tenement building. Children pressed their noses against the oven door window. Fathers came home from factory shifts covered in grease. They washed hands at the kitchen sink quickly. Mothers pulled the pan from the oven wearing thick mitts. Families ate chicken with their hands at the table. Children fought over the crispiest drumsticks playfully. Mothers saved bones for making soup stock tomorrow. This meal felt like a feast during hard times. Nobody left even one bite on their plates. Catholic working families ate salmon patties every Friday religiously. The church forbid eating meat on Fridays back then. Mothers bought canned pink salmon for 20 cents per can. One can made 6 patties that fed 8 people. They added breadcrumbs, eggs, and chopped onions to stretch it. The whole meal cost under 40 cents, including side vegetables. Mothers opened the can with a hand-crank can opener. They dumped salmon into a big mixing bowl carefully. They picked out bones and skin with their fingers. They mashed salmon with a fork until it flaked. They added stale breadcrumbs from yesterday's leftover bread. They cracked 1 egg and mixed it in thoroughly. They chopped onions fine and stirred them through. They formed mixture into flat patties with wet hands. They heated lard in a cast-iron skillet until smoking. They placed patties gently in the hot grease, carefully. Each patty sizzled and browned for 5 minutes per side. The kitchen filled with the smell of frying fish. Children set the table with mismatched plates and forks. Fathers washed coal dust from their faces at the sink. Mothers flipped patties with a metal spatula expertly. Golden brown crust formed on both sides perfectly. Families ate patties with boiled potatoes and canned green beans. Children squeezed lemon wedges over their patties always. This meal satisfied church rules and empty stomachs both. Mothers made it 52 Fridays every single year. Leftover patties made sandwiches for Saturday lunch. Nobody ever complained about eating salmon patties weekly. 2 butchers sold oxtails for 10 cents per pound cheap. Rich people never bought oxtails because they looked ugly. Working-class mothers knew oxtails made the richest stew. They bought 3 pounds of oxtails for 30 cents. They added root vegetables from the garden for free. The whole meal cost under 50 cents for 10 people. Mothers rinsed oxtails under cold water at the pump. They patted them dry with old flour sack towels. They seasoned oxtails with salt and pepper heavily all over. They heated lard in a big cast-iron pot first. They browned oxtails on all sides until dark, the kitchen filled with the smell of roasting meat. They added chopped onions, carrots, and turnips next. They poured water to cover everything completely in the pot. They added bay leaves and whole peppercorns for flavor. The pot simmered on the stove for 4 hours. Oxtails became so tender, meat fell off the bones. Gelatin from bones made gravy thick and silky. Vegetables broke down and sweetened the broth perfectly. Mothers came home during lunch hour to stir once. Children smelled the stew from 3 blocks away. Fathers scrubbed factory grease from their hands eagerly. Mothers ladled stew into deep bowls at supper time. Families soaked up gravy with thick bread slices. Children sucked marrow from the bones hungrily always. This meal stuck to ribs all night long. Leftover stew tasted even better the second day. Working families called this survival food that tasted rich. Native Americans taught working families to make succotash centuries ago. The word came from the Narragansett tribe originally. Mothers made it in 1 big skillet easily. They bought dried lima beans for 15 cents per pound. They bought canned corn for 8 cents per can. They bought turkey bacon for 20 cents as halal substitute. The whole meal cost under 50 cents for 8 people. Mothers soaked lima beans overnight in cold water. Morning came and they drained the soaking water away. They put beans in a cast-iron skillet with fresh water. They boiled beans for 1 hour until almost tender. They drained most of the water but left some. They added 2 cans of corn straight from the can. They chopped turkey bacon into small pieces and added it. They added butter, salt, and pepper generously to everything. Everything cooked together for 30 more minutes on low heat. Lima beans became creamy and broke down slightly naturally. Corn kernels sweetened the whole dish perfectly with sugar. Turkey bacon added smoky flavor throughout every single bite. This meal combined three foods. Native Americans grew together. Children learned about succotash in school history lessons. Mothers made it twice per week during summer. Gardens produced fresh lima beans and corn ears. Families picked vegetables together on Saturday mornings early. This meal connected them to America's oldest food traditions. It filled stomachs cheaply and taught history simultaneously always. Nobody knew they were eating Native American survival food. City chicken had no chicken in it at all. Working families in Pittsburgh and Detroit created this meal. They couldn't afford real chicken during the Depression years. They bought cheap beef cubes for 20 cents per pound. They skewered beef to look like chicken drumsticks cleverly. The whole meal cost under 60 cents for 8 people. Mothers cut beef into 2-inch cubes at the kitchen table. They threaded cubes onto wooden skewers tightly in rows. They made each skewer look like a chicken leg. They beat eggs in a shallow bowl with a fork. They poured breadcrumbs into another bowl nearby for dredging. They dipped each skewer into beaten egg first completely. They rolled skewers in breadcrumbs until coated all over. They heated lard in a big cast-iron skillet deep. They browned skewers on all sides until golden carefully. They transferred browned skewers to a roasting pan next. They added water to the bottom of the pan. They covered the pan with a heavy lid tight. The pan went into a moderate oven for 1 hour. Beef became tender and juicy from braising in steam. The breading stayed crispy on the outside perfectly somehow. Children thought they were eating real chicken drumsticks truly. Fathers held skewers by the stick and ate meat. This meal fooled everyone into feeling less poor. Mothers served it on Sundays as a special treat. City chicken made working families forget their struggles briefly. It proved that creativity mattered more than money. 15 one-pan suppers saved working families. Chicken drumsticks cost 29 cents per pound. Salmon patties satisfied church rules every Friday. Oxtails made the richest stew from ugly cuts. Succotash taught Native American survival skills. City chicken fooled children into feeling rich. Which forgotten supper surprised you most? 5 more suppers coming next. Mock chicken contained ground beef instead of real chicken. Working mothers invented it during wartime rationing years strictly. Real chicken became scarce and expensive during World War II. They bought ground beef for 25 cents per pound. They shaped beef into patties that looked like chicken. The whole meal cost under 50 cents for 8 people. Mothers mixed ground beef with breadcrumbs and 1 egg. They added salt, pepper, and a little milk. They formed flat oval patties with their wet hands. Each patty resembled a chicken breast cutlet, cleverly when shaped. They dipped patties in flour on both sides lightly. They heated lard in a big cast-iron skillet. They fried patties until browned on both sides perfectly. They transferred browned patties to a sheetpan next. They made gravy from the pan drippings with flour. They poured gravy over patties and covered with foil. The pan baked for 30 minutes in a moderate oven. Beef patties stayed moist and tender from the gravy. Children believed they were eating real chicken cutlets honestly. Teachers at school talked about helping the war effort. Families felt patriotic eating mock chicken instead of real meat. German-American working families made sausage and kraut weekly. They bought beef sausage for 30 cents per pound. They bought sauerkraut in big jars for 15 cents. They added apples to sweeten the sauerkraut naturally. The whole meal cost under 60 cents for 10 people. Mothers sliced sausage into thick rounds with sharp knives. They heated a little lard in a cast-iron skillet. They browned sausage rounds on both sides until crispy. They removed sausage and set it aside temporarily. They dumped sauerkraut straight from the jar into the skillet. They added sliced apples from the fruit cellar next. They sprinkled brown sugar over everything to balance sourness. They stirred everything together and let it cook down. They returned browned sausage to the skillet on top. They covered the skillet with a lid and simmered low. Everything cooked together for 45 minutes until tender. Sauerkraut softened and apples melted into the mixture. Sausage flavored everything with its fat and spices. The kitchen smelled tangy and sweet at the same time. Children wrinkled their noses at the sour smell first. Fathers loved this meal because it reminded them of childhood. Immigrant grandmothers brought this recipe from the old country. Families ate sauerkraut, believing it prevented winter sickness always. This meal connected them to their German heritage proudly. Working families made kidney bean bake in big casserole dishes. They bought dried kidney beans for 20 cents per pound. They bought beef sausage for 30 cents per pound. They added molasses to sweeten and thicken the sauce. The whole meal cost under 60 cents for 10 people. Mothers sorted kidney beans on the kitchen table carefully first. They removed stones and bad beans by hand slowly. They soaked beans overnight in a big pot always. Morning came, and they drained the soaking water away. They put beans in a casserole dish with fresh water. They sliced sausage into thick rounds and added it. They poured molasses over everything generously for sweetness and color. They added dry mustard powder and black pepper, too. They stirred everything together until molasses coated all beans. They covered the casserole with a heavy lid tight. The dish went into a slow oven for 4 hours. Beans turned creamy and absorbed all the sausage flavor. Molasses caramelized and made a thick brown sauce. The kitchen filled with sweet and savory smells together. Children came home from school following their noses eagerly. Fathers washed soot from factory smokestacks off their faces. Mothers pulled the casserole from the oven wearing thick mitts. Families ate beans with thick slices of buttered bread. Children soaked up sauce with every bite hungrily always. This meal stuck to ribs all through cold winter nights. Leftover beans made lunch for the next 3 days. Working families depended on kidney beans to survive hard times. Working families ate pan-fried steak only on special Sundays. They bought cheap beef round steak for 35 cents. Round steak was tough and needed pounding before cooking. They made gravy from the pan drippings to tenderize. The whole meal cost under 75 cents for 8 people. Mothers pounded steak with a meat mallet on the table. They hit it over and over until fibers broke down. They seasoned both sides with salt and pepper heavily. They dredged steak in flour on both sides completely. They heated lard in a big cast-iron skillet smoking hot. They laid steak in carefully and let it sizzle loud. They fried steak for 5 minutes per side until browned. They removed steak to a plate and covered it. They added flour to the hot drippings in the skillet. They stirred constantly until flour turned golden brown nicely. They poured milk slowly while whisking to prevent lumps forming. Gravy thickened and bubbled over medium heat perfectly. They returned steak to the skillet covered with gravy. Everything simmered together for 15 more minutes until tender. Steak soaked up gravy and became soft enough to cut. Children set the table with the good plates carefully. Fathers wore clean shirts for Sunday supper, always respectfully. Mothers sliced steak at the table like a ceremony. Families ate slowly and savored every single bite together. This meal felt like a celebration during hard times. Pan-fried steak meant things were going to be okay. Southern working families ate turnip greens 3 times weekly. They grew turnips in backyard gardens for free. Turnip greens cost nothing but labor and dirt. They bought cornmeal for 20 cents per 5-pound bag. The whole meal cost under 30 cents for 10 people. Mothers picked turnip greens early in the morning before work. They washed the greens 3 times to remove all dirt. They chopped greens into big pieces with sharp knives. They put greens in a big pot with water. They added smoked turkey wings for flavor and protein. They seasoned with salt, pepper, and red pepper flakes. The pot boiled first, then simmered low for 2 hours. Greens wilted down to half their original volume. Pot liquor turned dark green and flavorful from the greens. Mothers mixed cornmeal with buttermilk and eggs for cornbread. They poured batter into a hot cast-iron skillet, greased. Cornbread baked until golden brown and crispy on edges. Children set the table with bowls and spoons eagerly. Fathers came home from the mill covered in sawdust. They washed faces and hands at the pump outside. Mothers ladled greens into deep bowls at supper time ceremoniously. Families crumbled cornbread into the pot liquor together. Children soaked up every drop with cornbread pieces hungrily. This meal provided vitamins during winter months when nothing grew. Turnip greens kept families healthy through the coldest seasons. Working mothers believed greens cleaned the blood and gave strength. 21-pan suppers fed working America. Mock chicken stretched wartime rations cleverly. Sausage and kraut connected families to immigrant roots. Kidney beans and molasses stuck to ribs all night. Pan-fried steak always felt like a Sunday celebration. Turnip greens kept families healthy through winter. Which supper will you cook this week? 10 more powerful suppers are coming. In the 1930s, butchers gave away chicken giblets for almost nothing. Rich families threw giblets in the garbage without a second thought. Working-class mothers knew giblets contained the most nutrition in the whole chicken. They bought 1 pound of mixed giblets for just 10 cents. The bag contained chicken livers, gizzards, hearts, and necks, all mixed together. They bought white rice for 5 cents per pound from the corner store. The whole meal cost under 25 cents and fed 8 people easily. Mothers brought giblets home wrapped in brown butcher paper. They unwrapped the package on the kitchen table and sorted each piece carefully. They rinsed giblets under cold pump water 3 times to clean them thoroughly. They trimmed any fat or membranes from the gizzards with sharp paring knives. They cut hearts in half to check for blood clots inside. They left livers whole because they cooked fastest and fell apart easily. They heated bacon grease in a big cast-iron skillet until it shimmered. They added chopped onions first and fried until they turned soft and golden. They pushed onions to the side and added gizzards and hearts first. These tougher pieces needed longer cooking time to become tender enough. They browned giblets on all sides for 10 minutes until they developed color. They added chicken necks next and let them brown, too, for flavor. The kitchen filled with the rich smell of frying organ meat. They poured water over everything to cover the giblets completely in the skillet. They added bay leaves, black pepper, and salt generously to season well. They covered the skillet with a tight lid and let everything simmer. The giblets cooked low and slow for 1 full hour until tender. Gizzards became soft enough to cut with a fork, finally, after patience. They added uncooked white rice straight into the simmering giblet broth. They stirred rice once and covered the skillet again tightly. Rice absorbed all the rich giblet flavor and dark brown color. After 20 minutes, rice was tender and every grain separated perfectly. They added chicken livers last because they cooked in just 5 minutes. Livers turned from red to brown but stayed creamy inside perfectly. Children came home from school and smelled supper from the street. Fathers washed grease from factory machines off their hands at the sink. Mothers fluffed rice with a fork and served it steaming hot. Families ate giblet rice with their forks, picking out pieces of meat. Children fought over who got the most chicken hearts playfully. This meal provided more protein than expensive chicken breasts for pennies. Working families survived the Depression by eating parts rich people wasted. Southern working families made spoon bread when money ran desperately low. Spoon bread required only cornmeal, eggs, milk, and butter for everything. They bought cornmeal for 20 cents per 5-pound bag at the general store. They bought 3 eggs for 15 cents from the neighbor's chickens next door. They bought 1 quart of milk for 10 cents from the dairy. The whole meal cost under 50 cents and fed 8 hungry people. Mothers measured cornmeal into a big mixing bowl in the kitchen. They boiled water in a kettle on the wood-burning stove until it whistled. They poured boiling water over cornmeal slowly while stirring constantly with a wooden spoon. The mixture turned into a thick mush that looked like porridge immediately. They let the mush cool for 10 minutes on the counter. They separated eggs carefully, putting whites in one bowl and yolks in another. They beat egg whites with a wire whisk until stiff peaks formed. Their arms ached from whisking, but they kept going until perfect. They added egg yolks to the cooled cornmeal mush one at a time. They poured milk into the mixture and stirred until completely smooth. They added melted butter and salt generously to enhance the flavor throughout. They folded beaten egg whites into the batter very gently and carefully. The batter looked light and fluffy like cake batter almost magically. They greased a deep casserole dish with butter on all sides heavily. They poured the batter into the dish and smoothed the top flat. The dish went into a moderate oven for 45 minutes until set. Spoon bread puffed up like a soufflé while it baked in the heat. The top turned golden brown and developed a delicate crust on top. The inside stayed soft, creamy, and custard-like in texture perfectly. The kitchen filled with the warm smell of baking cornbread that made mouths water. Children pressed their faces against the oven door window to watch it rise. Fathers came home from working on the railroad tracks all day long. They scrubbed coal dust and railroad grease from their calloused hands thoroughly. Mothers pulled the casserole from the oven wearing thick quilted mitts protectively. Families gathered around the table and said grace before eating together. Mothers scooped spoon bread directly from the dish with a big serving spoon. It was too soft to slice like regular cornbread, so everyone got spoonfuls. Children drizzled molasses or honey over their portions generously and happily. Fathers ate it plain and asked for seconds and thirds always. This meal felt like dessert, but filled stomachs like real supper food. Spoon bread proved that simple ingredients could create comfort during hard times. Working families foraged dandelion greens from empty lots and roadsides for free. Dandelions grew everywhere in cities during springtime without any effort or cost. Rich people paid gardeners to pull dandelions like weeds and throw them away. Poor families knew dandelions were more nutritious than expensive store-bought lettuce. Mothers sent children out after school to pick dandelion greens in buckets. They picked only young tender leaves before the yellow flowers appeared. Old leaves tasted too bitter and tough to eat even when cooked. Children filled buckets in 30 minutes and brought them home proudly. They bought turkey bacon for 20 cents as a halal substitute for pork. The whole meal cost only 20 cents because greens were completely free. Mothers dumped dandelion greens into the kitchen sink filled with cold water. They swished greens around to remove dirt, bugs, and grass clippings thoroughly. They changed the water 3 times until it ran completely clear finally. They shook greens dry and piled them on the counter in big mounds. They chopped greens roughly with a big sharp knife into manageable pieces. They heated a cast-iron skillet and added chopped turkey bacon first to render. Bacon sizzled and released its fat into the hot skillet, slowly and fragrantly. They removed crispy bacon pieces and set them aside on a plate. They left all the bacon grease in the skillet for cooking the greens. They added chopped garlic and let it sizzle for 30 seconds until fragrant. They piled all the dandelion greens into the skillet at once quickly. The greens filled the skillet completely to the top at first. They stirred greens constantly as they wilted down dramatically in volume. Within 5 minutes, the huge pile reduced to just 2 cups of cooked greens. They added salt, black pepper, and a pinch of red pepper flakes. They stirred in the crispy bacon pieces at the very end. They squeezed fresh lemon juice over everything to brighten the bitter flavor. The kitchen smelled earthy and smoky from the bacon and greens together. Children set the table reluctantly because they hated eating weeds from the yard. Fathers came home from the factory and washed their hands quickly. Mothers served dandelion greens as a side dish with cornbread and beans. Families ate greens believing they cleaned the blood and prevented sickness in spring. Children made faces but ate every bite because mothers insisted firmly. This meal cost almost nothing but provided vitamins after a long winter. Dandelion greens proved that free food grew everywhere if you knew where to look. Working families survived by foraging what rich people threw away as worthless garbage. Working families ate rutabagas all winter because they stored for months without spoiling. Rutabagas looked ugly with their yellow flesh and purple skin and waxy coating. Rich people never bought rutabagas because they seemed like peasant food to them. Poor families knew rutabagas filled stomachs cheaply and lasted through the coldest months. They bought 5 pounds of rutabagas for 15 cents at the vegetable market. They bought salt-cured beef for 30 cents per pound from the butcher shop. The whole meal cost under 60 cents and fed 10 people easily enough. Mothers scrubbed rutabagas under cold water to remove dirt and wax coating thoroughly. They peeled thick skin away with a sharp paring knife, carefully and slowly. Rutabagas were hard as rocks and difficult to cut, even with sharp knives. They chopped rutabagas into 1-inch cubes with great effort and strong arms. They rinsed salt beef under cold running water to remove excess salt crystals. Too much salt would make the whole meal inedible and waste precious money. They cut salt beef into chunks and put it in a big pot. They covered beef with fresh water and brought it to a rolling boil. They skimmed foam off the top with a big metal spoon patiently. They added rutabaga cubes to the pot with the beef after skimming. They added whole black peppercorns and bay leaves for extra flavor throughout. The pot simmered on the stove for 2 hours until everything became tender. Rutabagas broke down and became soft and almost sweet in taste, surprisingly. Salt beef became tender enough to pull apart with a fork easily. The cooking liquid turned into a rich broth from the beef and vegetables. Mothers mashed some rutabaga pieces right in the pot to thicken the broth. The kitchen filled with the earthy smell of cooking root vegetables and meat. Children wrinkled their noses because rutabagas smelled like old socks when cooking. Fathers came home from coal mines with black dust covering their faces completely. They scrubbed at the outdoor pump before coming inside for supper always. Mothers ladled rutabaga and beef into deep bowls with plenty of broth. Families ate this meal with thick slices of dark rye bread for soaking. Children complained, but ate every bite because nothing else was available anyway. This meal stuck to ribs through long, cold nights when heating fuel ran low. Rutabagas cost almost nothing and provided calories and vitamins both together. Working families depended on ugly root vegetables to survive winter every single year. Salt beef made rutabagas taste like a real meal. Working families grew parsnips and carrots in backyard gardens during the Depression years. Both vegetables grew easily in poor soil without much care or attention needed. They stored in root cellars all winter long without rotting or spoiling completely. Parsnips looked like white carrots but tasted sweeter after the first frost hit. Mothers harvested parsnips and carrots from the garden for completely free always. They saved bacon drippings in a jar on the stove for cooking fat. The whole meal cost under 25 cents, including just the drippings and seasonings. Mothers scrubbed parsnips and carrots under cold water to remove all garden dirt. They peeled both vegetables with a paring knife until skin came off cleanly. They sliced parsnips and carrots into thick rounds about half an inch each. They tossed vegetable rounds in bacon drippings until completely coated and glistening. They arranged vegetables in a single layer on a big sheetpan carefully. They sprinkled salt, pepper, and a little brown sugar over everything generously. Brown sugar helped caramelize the vegetables and bring out their natural sweetness. The pan went into a hot oven for 45 minutes until tender. Vegetables roasted until edges turned brown and caramelized beautifully with crispy bits. Parsnips became almost candy-like with their natural sugars concentrating from the heat. Carrots turned soft and sweet and lost their raw, harsh flavor completely. The kitchen filled with the smell of roasting vegetables and caramelized sugar together. Children came home from school and actually got excited about eating vegetables tonight. Fathers came home from working construction jobs, building roads for the government. They washed cement dust and dirt from under their fingernails at the sink. Mothers pulled the sheetpan from the oven, wearing thick quilted mitts protectively. Families gathered around the table and ate roasted vegetables as the main supper. There was no meat that night because money had run out completely. Children ate parsnips, thinking they tasted like dessert because of the sweetness. Fathers filled up on vegetables and bread without complaining once about the lack of meat. This meal proved that vegetables alone could satisfy hunger if cooked properly with care. Parsnips provided calories and energy for hard physical work the next day. Carrots provided vitamins that kept families healthy through long, dark winters without sunlight. 25 one-pan suppers kept working families alive. Chicken giblets cost 10 cents per pound. Spoon bread felt like dessert for supper. Dandelion greens grew free everywhere in spring. Rutabagas survived winter storage perfectly, parsnips roasted like candy without meat. Which forgotten supper will you try first? 5 more powerful suppers remain. Butchers sold beef shank for 15 cents per pound because nobody wanted it. Beef shank looked tough and full of bone and connective tissue throughout. Rich people bought expensive tender cuts like ribeye or sirloin steaks instead always. Working-class mothers knew beef shank made the richest, most flavorful stew possible. The bone marrow added richness that expensive cuts could never match at all. They bought 2 pounds of beef shank for 30 cents from the butcher. They bought dried lima beans for 15 cents per pound at the store. The whole meal cost under 50 cents and fed 10 hungry people easily. Mothers soaked lima beans overnight in a big pot of cold water. Morning came and they drained the soaking water and rinsed beans thoroughly. They heated a little lard in a big heavy pot on the stove. They browned beef shank pieces on all sides until deeply caramelized and dark. Browning took 15 minutes, but created the foundation of flavor for everything. They removed browned shanks and set them aside on a plate temporarily. They added chopped onions to the pot and scraped up browned bits from the bottom. They returned beef shanks to the pot and added drained lima beans on top. They poured water to cover everything by 2 inches above the ingredients. They added bay leaves, black peppercorns, and salt generously for seasoning throughout. The pot came to a rolling boil first, then they reduced heat low. Everything simmered gently for 3 full hours until meat fell off the bones. They stirred occasionally and added more water if the liquid got too low. Beef shank became so tender it melted in your mouth like butter almost. Lima beans broke down slightly and created a creamy, thick sauce naturally. The marrow from the bones melted into the broth and made it silky. The kitchen filled with the deep, rich smell of slow-cooked meat and beans. Children came home from school and smelled supper from 2 blocks away eagerly. Fathers came home from steel mills covered in soot and metal filings completely. They scrubbed their faces and arms at the kitchen sink with harsh lye soap. Mothers ladled beans and beef into deep bowls with plenty of the rich broth. Families used bread to soak up every single drop of the precious liquid. Children sucked marrow from the bones like candy because it tasted so rich. Fathers ate 3 bowls and asked for more until the pot was empty. This meal stuck to ribs through cold nights and hard physical labor the next day. Beef shank proved that cheap, tough cuts became tender with patience and time. Working families survived by knowing how to cook what others threw away as worthless scraps. They returned beef shanks to the pot and added drained lima beans on top. They poured water to cover everything by 2 inches above the ingredients. They added bay leaves, black peppercorns, and salt generously for seasoning throughout. The pot came to a rolling boil first, then they reduced heat low. Everything simmered gently for 3 full hours until meat fell off the bones. They stirred occasionally and added more water if the liquid got too low. Beef shank became so tender it melted in your mouth like butter almost. Lima beans broke down slightly and created a creamy, thick sauce naturally. The marrow from the bones melted into the broth and made it silky. The kitchen filled with the deep, rich smell of slow-cooked meat and beans. Children came home from school and smelled supper from 2 blocks away eagerly. Coastal working families ate salt cod because fresh fish spoiled too quickly without refrigeration. Salt cod came dried hard as a board and lasted for months. Portuguese and Italian immigrant families brought salt cod recipes from the old country. They bought 1 pound of salt cod for 25 cents at the fish market. They bought saltine crackers for 10 cents per box at the corner store. They bought 1 quart of milk for 10 cents from the dairy wagon. The whole meal cost under 50 cents and fed 8 people easily enough. Mothers soaked salt cod in cold water for 24 hours to remove salt. They changed the water 3 times during soaking to prevent too much saltiness. The cod softened and rehydrated until it looked like fresh fish, almost magically. They broke cod into large flakes with their hands and removed any bones. They greased a deep casserole dish with butter on all sides heavily. They layered flaked cod on the bottom of the dish in an even layer. They crushed saltine crackers in a bowl until they became fine crumbs completely. They mixed cracker crumbs with melted butter until the mixture held together slightly. They poured milk over the cod in the casserole dish until barely covered. They added black pepper and a little onion powder for flavor throughout. They spread buttered cracker crumbs over the top in a thick layer. The casserole went into a moderate oven for 45 minutes until bubbly hot. The top turned golden brown and crispy, while the inside stayed creamy and soft. The kitchen filled with the smell of baking fish and toasted crackers together. Children set the table with forks, because this meal required no knives at all. Fathers came home from working on fishing boats or factory docks all day. They washed fish scales and salt spray from their hands and faces thoroughly. Mothers brought the casserole to the table, still bubbling in the dish hot. Families scooped portions onto their plates and ate while steaming and fragrant. The crackers on top provided crunch, while the fish underneath stayed tender and flaky. Milk sauce held everything together and made it feel rich and satisfying completely. Catholic families ate this meal every Friday to obey church rules about meat. Coastal families ate it year-round because salt cod was cheaper than fresh fish. Children actually liked this meal because it didn't taste too fishy or strong. This meal proved that preserved foods could taste as good as fresh ingredients. Salt cod kept families fed when fresh food wasn't available or affordable at all. Working families on the coast depended on the ocean for survival, always and gratefully. Butchers practically gave beef hearts away because most people refused to eat them. Beef heart looked scary and bloody and reminded people it came from inside an animal. And rich families would never serve organ meats to their guests at dinner parties. Working-class mothers knew beef heart was pure muscle and extremely nutritious and cheap. They bought one whole beef heart for 20 cents at the butcher shop. They bought potatoes, carrots, and onions from the root cellar for almost free. The whole meal cost under 40 cents and fed 8 people easily and completely. Mothers rinsed the beef heart under cold water to remove blood and membranes. They trimmed away any fat, valves, and tough arteries with a sharp knife. They sliced the heart into thin strips, like steak pieces, carefully and slowly. Heart meat looked dark red and dense like the toughest steak you ever saw. They seasoned heart strips with salt and pepper on both sides generously. They heated lard in a big cast-iron pot until it was smoking hot. They browned heart pieces on all sides until deeply caramelized and crusty. Browning took 20 minutes because they had to work in batches carefully. They removed browned heart and set it aside on a plate temporarily. They added chopped onions to the pot and cooked until soft and golden. They added flour and stirred to make a roux for thickening the stew. They poured water in slowly while whisking constantly to prevent lumps from forming. They returned heart pieces to the pot with all their accumulated juices. They added potato chunks and carrot pieces cut into large bite-sized pieces. They added bay leaves, thyme, and more black pepper for extra flavor throughout. The pot simmered on low heat for 2 full hours until heart became tender. Beef heart was even tougher than the toughest beef shank and needed patience. After 2 hours, heart pieces became tender enough to cut with a fork. The stew thickened naturally from the potatoes breaking down slightly in the liquid. The kitchen filled with the rich smell of slow-cooked meat and vegetables together. Children came home from school and complained about eating heart for supper again. Fathers came home from coal mines with black dust covering every inch of skin. They scrubbed at the outdoor pump before coming inside for the evening meal. Mothers ladled stew into deep bowls and served with thick bread slices always. Families ate beef heart stew without enthusiasm, but with full stomachs afterward completely. This meal provided more protein than expensive cuts for a fraction of the cost. Beef heart kept working families strong enough for hard physical labor every single day. They survived the Depression by eating parts that others considered disgusting waste materials only. Italian immigrant working families made tripe stew in big pots on Sundays traditionally. Tripe came from cow stomach lining and looked white and honeycomb textured strangely. American-born children refused to eat tripe until mothers forced them to try. Immigrant grandmothers insisted tripe was a delicacy from the old country, always proudly. They bought 2 pounds of honeycomb tripe for 20 cents at the Italian butcher. They bought canned tomatoes for 10 cents per can at the corner store. The whole meal cost under 50 cents and fed 10 people easily enough. Mothers scrubbed tripe under cold running water for 15 minutes to clean thoroughly. They cut tripe into 2-inch squares with sharp kitchen scissors carefully and slowly. They put tripe in a big pot and covered it with cold water. They brought water to a boil and then drained it immediately to remove impurities. This meal connected immigrant families to their heritage and homeland across the ocean. Tripe cost almost nothing and provided protein when expensive meat was impossible to afford. Butchers sold beef tongue for 15 cents because most Americans refused to buy it. Beef tongue looked exactly like what it was and scared people away immediately. Jewish and Eastern European immigrant families knew tongue was tender and delicious when cooked right. They bought one whole beef tongue weighing about 3 pounds for 45 cents. They bought mustard powder and flour for making the sauce for just pennies. The whole meal cost under 60 cents and fed 10 people easily and completely. Mothers scrubbed beef tongue under cold running water to remove any blood or slime. They put tongue in the biggest pot they owned and covered it with water. They added bay leaves, whole peppercorns, and a halved onion for flavor in the water. They brought the pot to a rolling boil and then reduced heat to simmer. Tongue needed to cook for 3 full hours until tender enough to slice properly. The kitchen filled with the smell of boiling meat that made neighbors curious always. After 3 hours, mothers removed tongue from the pot with 2 big forks. They plunged hot tongue into a bowl of ice-cold water immediately to shock it. The skin peeled off easily after the cold water shock, like magic almost. These 31-pan suppers fed working-class families through America's hardest decades. Your grandmother cooked after 12-hour shifts with tired hands. She used 1 pot because time was precious. She fed 8 people for 50 cents when wages barely covered rent. These suppers kept families alive without fancy ingredients. Pick one forgotten supper from this list now. Buy simple ingredients this week. Cook it in 1 pan this weekend. Tell your family how working mothers saved everyone 1 supper at a time. Which 1-pan supper will you make first today?